In this section, we're going to talk about margin of safety and operating leverage. Both these are indicators of risk for companies. First, we'll take a look at margin of safety. Margin of safety is the difference between your expected sales or your existing current level sales and your break-even sales. The difference between what you're making right now and what you would make in order to break even. That is your margin of safety. It's basically just a cushion. It measures how much a drop in sales that a company can absorb before they incur a loss. You can calculate margin of safety in one of two ways. You can calculate margin of safety in units or in dollars. The only difference between those two is volume. The first set of numbers, if you multiply those set by the sales volume, you would get the second set of numbers. So, margin of safety in units is expected sales in units minus break-even sales in units, or margin of safety in dollars is expected sales, this would be sales revenue, minus break-even sales revenue. You want the margin of safety to be as big as possible. The bigger the better. The thicker the cushion, the more it can absorb a drop in sales, right? So you want the margin of safety to be as big as possible. Sometimes margin of safety is also expressed as percentage. If your question say calculate margin of safety as a percentage, what you would do is you would use this formula, and your margin of safety as a percentage is margin of safety in units divided by expected sales in units. Or you can also say margin of safety in dollars divided by expected sales in dollars. Next, we're going to take a look at operating leverage factor. The operating leverage factor is also an indicator of risk, and we calculate it by dividing our contribution margin by our operating income. The operating leverage factor is very useful because it shows us how much our operating income will change if there's a change in sales volume, and we'll talk about that more in class and learn how to calculate it. Also note that the lowest possible number for this factor is 1. If a company has a operating leverage factor of 1, that means this company has no fixed costs. We can classify companies into high operating leverage companies and low operating leverage companies. High operating leverage companies typically have higher levels of fixed costs and lower levels of variable costs. They have high contribution margin ratios, and these companies are typically higher risk companies. Even though these companies have higher risk, they also have a high potential for reward. Examples of high operating leverage companies are hotels, golf courses, theme parks, airlines, cruise lines. Typically, these type of companies have very high fixed costs. Because of these high fixed costs, their operating income is extremely sensitive to changes in volume of customers. On the other side, we have low operating leverage companies. These are companies that have an operating leverage of close to 1. These companies have higher levels of variable cost and very few fixed costs. They have lower contribution margin ratios, and these companies are not very sensitive to changes in volume. Changes in volume do not have a significant effect on their operating income, so they face lower risk and lower potential for reward. An example of a low operating leverage company is a merchandising company. For a merchandising company, changes in volume does not have a significant effect on their operating income. So how does this operating leverage factor work? Let's take a look at an example. Let's say that we have a company with an operating leverage factor of 3. Let's take a look at what will happen if our sales volume increases by 5%. For this particular company, if our sales volume increases by 5%, we say that the operating income will increase by 15%. How do we calculate 15%? We take our operating leverage factor of 3 and multiply it by our expected increase in sales volume. So, for a 5% change in sales volume, our operating income increased by 15%. The same way, if our sales volume had decreased by 5%, operating income would have also decreased by 15%. So this company is quite sensitive to changes in sales volume.